conflict, politics, military-industrial complex, technology, war. The Flash Traffic Podcast.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. I guess it's all relative. It's all okay. We're starting, by the way. So,
all right.
We were just talking about how much Canada loves Trump and how excited they are to have a strong, stable genius at the helm of the United States. Yeah.
It's very it's very reassuring. Yeah.
51st state.
We're so looking forward to that. Yes.
do you think that was? I saw the whatever it is, the White House, the Oval Office sit down with Mark Carney, and he was. Do you think he was just trying to keep a straight face the whole time, or do you think what was his internal narrative right there?
Like so many of the world leaders who have been through the Oval Office routine, we've seen them struggle before. Maloney from Italy, who's more expressive, maybe clearly was stunned a few times, and I think Carney was prepared for it. He looked like he was well prepared.
At least Trump didn't give Maloney a back rub. I expected that. I thought that was coming, and it didn't happen. So plus, we're winning. America. Yeah. Which part of Canada do you live in?
I'm in the outskirts of Vancouver, on the West Coast. Yeah.
Oh, nice. That's exciting. I have not skied up there, but I've heard it's nice.
Yes, Whistler.
Eric wants to go skiing, but he's associated with Arizona now, so he forgot how to ski.
So that's in British Columbia, right? That borders Oklahoma. That's cool.
They had legal marijuana before it was cool in Vancouver.
Well, that's saying something.
Yes, it's I guess 4 or 5 years ago now. Yeah, at least. And
I think they were the vanguard of the.
A few Canadians had to learn the hard way that doesn't mean you can cross into the United States with some products.
Or at least not tell anybody.
Even the oil that's derived from marijuana that people use, I forget what it's called.
CBD oil?
Yeah. I think a few people got nailed with that.
Yeah.
Because Tony looks like a cheap Joe Rogan knockoff, he too has marijuana as a big part of his life.
That's no comment. No comment.
Right.
I'm not gonna. I won't validate that with a trip around my home office here.
Medicinal marijuana only.
That's right.
Doctor ordered.
That's right. How did you get started with the Ukraine war and the videos? Because you're prolific on posting and commenting on what's going on with the Ukraine war. How did you get into that?
Well, I have been following events in Ukraine off and on since 2014.
Wow.
As I say, occasionally, kind of keep track of the sideboards of the Donetsk airport and some of their big stories like that. But when the invasion happened, it just really hit me hard that this could be one of the big events of our time. And so I began to follow it, everything I could find on it, and gradually worked my way to realize that all the increasing deluge of incredible video that's been coming out of there. We have a God's eye view of this war in unbelievable detail. That all that was coming from Telegram, the messaging service and chat service that is heavily used by not just Russia but by Ukraine as well. And so I began to haunt those channels and increasingly spent more and more time at it. I'm not well situated here, time zone wise, here on the West Coast.
Right.
Most of the new postings on Telegram come out, starting at midnight my time. So I've become quite a creature of the night. I had to go to bed early last night just to make sure I was fine for this interview.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
It's a lot of pressure.
You're gonna be in great position when the Chinese attack Taiwan. You'll be in the perfect geographic position to report on that.
West Coast guy.
All the East Coast guys will be asleep, and you'll be reporting on it.
They're going to learn the hard way.
What do you think you think all these different videos, and I imagine most of them are geolocated, so you know where they're happening. Don't you think AI could just put together a big movie, like a nonstop rolling movie of different scenes, but kind of mesh it all together so it makes sense? So what you're watching is like those black and white videos that they colorized of reporters, journalists in World War II, where they're on the beach, and they're taking videos and stuff. Like we should have like a very highly advanced version of that with all these videos. We should have a motion picture.
Well, it would be great for me to have something like that too. Just some way to help organize the massive fire hose of video data that pours out, and it increases all the time. No one person could possibly keep up with it all. I certainly don't. I just kind of focus on certain areas that interest me, and to have an AI help would be huge. My son works in information technology and in cybersecurity, and he holds a number of contracts at the same time. And he's finding he's spent quite a bit of time using AI recently to help him, with the time-consuming programming and so forth. And he explained to me that he's learned that AI isn't just a really great power tool that you have in your carpenter's shop. It's like having a colleague, like Data from Star Trek, who you can just talk with, and yet at the same time has immense capabilities. So he's learned to say, instead of program this for me, he'll start off with this: here's my situation, what do you think we could do? And the AI will lay out options, and so he's learned it's a back and forth conversation. And he says he's in early days in learning what the capabilities are. You have to understand your AI program that you're using to really leverage it.
Yeah, there are some Luddites like Eric, who I've been told he's an author, and he doesn't like to use ChatGPT to help him at all. And
I think Tony says he's working on a book, and he's doing it all from ChatGPT. He literally hasn't written a word of it himself, other than like his name, and like unless like his author's name on it. The entire thing is just ChatGPT.
I asked ChatGPT, hey, what kind of book do you think we should write? What do you think about a book? What book would you write, ChatGPT?
That's how to start off with it. Is just talking with it.
It is a tool. It's like, I think if you don't use ChatGPT, you're like one of those people that didn't want to use a word processor. That you were comfortable with the white tape and the going back and taking the white out and typing over it, and that's where you are.
That's literally not the same comparison. Literally not the same comparison. You are incapable of creating original thought. So you have to scrape the internet to write yourself a book. It's sad, bro.
I don't think that's true, but if you look at like 90% of nonfiction writing, the actual writing, let's take Max Boot, for example. He just wrote a huge volume on Reagan. He writes a lot about war. If you look at 90% of his sentences, they are ChatGPT level writing. And nothing against Max Boot or his wife that just got in trouble 6 months ago, all that scandal. Nothing against Max Boot, but any nonfiction writer, like a lot of those sentences are, I need to write a chapter. If I'm writing on the Ukraine war, I have to write a chapter on naval warfare. It's not in my ballywick. It's probably going to be not very enthusiastic, but you got to have it in the book or somebody's going to
So you're saying he's a fraud. He's a plagiarizing fraud.
How do you get that?
That's what you just said. You said that his chapters are ChatGPT written.
ChatGPT written stuff is not plagiarism. That is your own unique prompt into the AI sphere, and you own that stuff.
You didn't come up with it. You didn't create it. It is web scraping, bro.
No, it's like
Pete Hegseth's thesis, where he plagiarized 12 different things in his paper. Yeah, you didn't come up with it. It's not your content.
I disagree with you.
Of course you do, because you're using a fake program to write your book, bro.
You first of all, you don't know the extent to which I'm using it or how I'm using it. You don't even know the website. Like if I said go to ChatGPT right now, you'd be like, I don't even know what is that .eu. You wouldn't have any idea how you even get there. So
that's cold, bro. That hurts, man. I was having an intellectual conversation. You made it personal.
I think Roy and his son are correct when we talk about this is maybe more than a tool. This is maybe it is a collaborator, someone in the office that you can talk to that doesn't steal your milk from the fridge. And at the same time steals all your personal information and puts it on the web. I don't know. But I think it's going to be useful. I do think if you don't use it for daily life, you're probably missing something. And that'll change. I think that'll change. People, early adopters are using it now. People will come around.
Yeah, it's going to become pervasive pretty fast.
I'm sure Palantir, we've talked about this before in the Ukraine war, Palantir and other IT kind of companies are using ChatGPT-like technologies to discern things on the battlefield, to make decisions on targeting, to make decisions on intelligence as it comes in, information, turning it into intelligence. So I'm sure it's already happening.
But this is all based on your database. If your data is shit, then your ChatGPT web scraping is also shit. You can scrape shit from the internet and have no way to verify its veracity and truthfulness. You're just whatever data is thrown out there, you're scraping it. And then I would caution making any lethal targeting decisions on web scraping stuff where you can't ascertain the veracity of the data that's out there. Where'd you get the data from? How do you know it's accurate?
Yeah.
Well, from the beginning of computing, garbage in, garbage out, certainly, but we don't know how much Ukraine is using AI. They have so much stuff to go through. I would hope that they would have to have some assistance in weeding through, but certainly any targeting decisions, a person steps in before a HIMARS rocket is expended on a target. That's for sure.
Right. And it may be what
not
we
an
call
automatic function.
Yeah, maybe what we call cross queuing of intelligence assets. You have, let's say a satellite picks something up and it just queues a local asset. It tells, we think something's out here. So it's queuing up something else to go look at it. And so maybe that's what AI is doing. It's coming up with a theory of, hey, I think the Russians are moving on this front, but why don't you go check it out? You're not going to put ChatGPT in charge of shooting HIMARS, pushing the button. Eventually we might get there because war is going to be moving so quickly that if you have a human, a meat sack sitting there and looking at a TV screen, the battle's going to be over by the time that person gets a cup of coffee, sits down, checks his email, makes a decision. How much? And how much data do you think it takes to train them? I don't know, but machine learning for one of these AI systems, we've got a lot of video of Russian tanks at this point. We've got 3.5 years of Russian tank videos. Like how much video do you need to recognize their tactics, their TTPs, you know, the visual signature of a tank with a cope cage or a REB, electronic warfare suite on the top? I can't imagine it takes that much.
Well, an example would be both sides' efforts to create an FPV drone that has autonomous terminal targeting and control. So that takes machine learning, how to recognize a vehicle, and then at that point, the operator will release the system to handle, to operate itself to the final hit, so as to overcome a vehicle-borne jammer. And that has been long promised and has still yet to arrive. It was supposed to be here last year, and the first generation of machine learning drones failed. The programming just wasn't strong enough. They had to get too close to release it, or it would lose its lock. It turned out to be, I guess one of those things that's a lot easier said than done. You mentioned that vehicles are festooned now with all kinds of stuff, cope cages of every description, many different kinds of REB antennas. And then if you put it parked in a tree line and it's obscured or there's some netting on it, there's just almost an infinite types of images that it would have to be trained on to be really, 99% reliable or whatever level that they're aiming at. And that seems still to be quite a ways away. One of the reasons, apparently, that Ukraine fell so far behind the Russians with fiber optic FPVs, the Russians introduced them last summer, and Ukraine is still trying to get rolling on them in numbers, is that last year all the funding went towards this AI drone. And when it failed, it's really put them, half a year or more than half a year, well behind. And they're I understand the rumor mill says that very large quantities of fiber optic coils have been ordered from China and are due by late June. Hopefully sooner the better. But it's people say, well, just get a simple image recognition program. They're available on the web, and it's, I guess, much more complicated than that.
Yeah, it seems more complicated, like you said, than your Ring camera, your doorbell camera can tell you if it's a person or a vehicle. And you would think, well, that's kind of all you need to do, because tanks really look like a tank. But like you said, when it's out in the wild and it's in the Posádka, in the tree line, those tanks that doesn't look like a tank. And part of military deception is the whole idea is you want it not to look like a tank. You want to look like, a tree or whatever.
Yes, and that'll become, they're not even trying to do that yet, just trying to protect themselves against FPVs. Every vehicle seems to have its own unique profile now. And once the machine learning drones become effective, then they'll add on efforts to further obscure, I would think, the outline of any vehicle that's within it. The ever increasing range of FPVs too. One of the things that fiber optic FPVs has done, that it's really extended the range of FPVs, because a fiber optic FPV doesn't have to worry about maintaining a radio line of sight. So they can go on as long as they have the battery power and a big enough fiber coil. They're up to 30 kilometers now, and that will just grow.
Yeah, I saw that the Ukrainians just hit the largest fiber optic cable factory in Russia. And apparently there was just one of them that we know of, or that was reported on. And that was last week, I think. Last week. Yeah. But you're right. China's just loving this. They're the middleman that just sells stuff they'll sell it to Russia, they'll sell it to Ukraine, and they're loving it. They're loving it.
certainly Ukraine has built its strategy now on small drones. They've have an initiative called the drone line, where they intend to have a no-go zone up to 20 kilometers deep, where anything that moves on the Russian side will be hit by FPVs. They're going to aim to manufacture 5 million of them this year total. And Russia, of course, trying to do the same thing, though luckily they've fallen quite a bit behind in total numbers of FPVs. But without China, it's just not going to happen. I mean, each side says that they're trying to have a domestic drone industry, but I think they're finding out that that's also a lot harder said than done. I've been following some stories where a Russian company and a Ukrainian company just trying to build the basic motors that FPV uses. And they say, well, we may not be able to have it as cheap as a Chinese motor, but we should be able to build one that's at least as good. And they found that there's more engineering inside these cheap little FPV motors than they realize. They're having a hard time just matching the capabilities, the specifications of there's apparently just more engineering and subtleties in how copper wire is wound within to make it's spun by electromagnets, and more to it than meets the eye there. And that's taken a lot longer.
You need rare earth permanent magnets for any micro motors, and that is at this time a Chinese absolute monopoly. And all of them also lithium-ion batteries. Every one of these little dudes is rolling with a lithium-ion battery, which goes through Asia, and then probably some way, shape, or form touches China. Some of it, I think right now China produces 99% of the graphite anode material or the negative terminal of the battery. They have an absolute global monopoly on batteries, right? Because you just have to have one part of it. You can't have a battery without a negative terminal. So they have absolute control of that negative terminal. It's going to go through China right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about when the armistice is signed or when the peace treaty is signed, and the next level for Ukraine is to export their drone warfare, as a military hardware export. But if they can't make the drones, I don't know how successful they're going to be. If they're still buying most of their drone components from China. I mean, they have the tactics, techniques, and procedures down. I guess they could export that as, some kind of militia or some soldiers of fortune, mercenaries. But the money is in the hardware. So Ukraine needs to figure out how they can mass produce this stuff, and that's mass producing cheap things that are pretty effective for their cost. That's China's, that's all China. So I don't know how successful they're going to be with that. Do you follow any other theaters? Have you been following drone warfare in Somalia? Or we talked about the Mavic drone bomb last week in Dublin, Ireland.
Oh,
have you been following any of that stuff? Do you watch it?
I'm always on the lookout for that, to see how small drone warfare, because it is going to spread throughout the world,
right?
And how that's happening. That it gives a very cheap entry point for all kinds of entities, not just countries, to have the capabilities of incomparably more expensive anti-tank guided missiles, for instance. And it's just imagine how the Great War on Terror would have gone in Afghanistan or Iraq if the Taliban or the enemy in Iraq had FPVs. It would have been radically different. They had enough problem with roadside IEDs, so flying IEDs just would, and that's what's going to happen in the next asymmetric conflict, wherever it happens. And it's pretty much a revolution in a way. They massive amounts of inexpensive but very effective small drones is just a huge change.
That's interesting that you bring up Iraq and Afghanistan and the counter factual of what would have happened, because I like to say the United States is not going to fight like the Ukrainians. We're not going to use cheap Chinese drones to fight, because we have lots of money to throw at the problem. So we're going to fight it our, extravagant and wasteful way. And we need to learn from the war so we know how our enemy is going to fight. But that really just takes into consideration force on force, a large conventional battle. And thinking about Afghanistan and Iraq, how would it have been different if the U.S. Army used FPV drones doing counterinsurgency? You wouldn't have convoys, right? You wouldn't necessarily have to move troops all across, in dangerous areas. You wouldn't have to put in infantry to patrol a city or try to contain some of the Taliban in certain areas. That's an interesting question. There may be a lot more utility for the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense in counterinsurgency with drones, sort of like fighting fire with fire.
Certainly, every infantry squad in Iraq could have had their own Mavic reconnaissance drone that they controlled, rather than competing for the very small number of cameras on the large aircraft-like drones that were available at the time, or what the U.S. decided was the thing to focus on. And so they would have to embrace that idea, though, of driving down access to small drones right down to the small unit level. And it's hard to say whether that's a possibility with their structure now. With regards to your comment on you'll do it the most expensive way, an example is the U.S. Army has announced a program called Lasso, where they're going to give kamikaze drones down to the company level, but they chose the Switchblade 600, which is $80,000 a copy.
What a waste of money!
And the smaller Switchblade failed completely in Ukraine. It had zero resistance to jamming. Both sides kind of laughed when they took it apart and saw how basic the components were. It was just it's a drone that they produce more effectively for a tenth the cost. And so when you make that choice, then you doom your forces. No matter how rich the U.S. is, it's still going to be a pretty small number that infantry company is going to have. And when they use them up, how are they going to replace them if that's what they've been trained on? You nailed it.
Yeah, I had not heard that Lasso. I'll do some research into that, but we are big anti-Switchblade anything.
Tony is.
I am. We've been talking about the garbage 300 and the garbage 600 since the beginning of this podcast, I think. You're right. Everything I've heard is exactly what you said. The 300 is too small, is too susceptible to whatever. The 600 has enough pop. It's expensive, though. It's bigger, heavier,
Can the U.S. produce anything in a cost-effective manner? Right, there's so much inflation. I call it the wealth inflation trap. We're squeezed out of tons of markets and commodities and things because we can't produce anything cheap. Everything costs tons of money to make anything.
Certainly, if you go through the established military industrial companies, it's doomed to be incredibly expensive. And and the lack, and the U.S. has lost its China-like manufacturing capacity, where they can produce very large numbers of things cost effectively, and so for them, they don't want to use Chinese components. Obviously, they don't want to be caught in that trap. But how do they make their own? Then they'd have to go to small companies and provide them help and sort of build that base up from scratch, because they're not going to get it from the top. They're not going to get it from big companies. They can't do it, as you say.
Yeah.
If I could mention just one anecdote, I mean, it's a sad anecdote that doesn't get us anywhere, but I remember being in Iraq in 2004 and doing a tour in Baghdad and, wanting some sort of ISR capability that our team had. Like, I don't want to go to the battalion headquarters to get a drone to fly over this building. Like, dude, I need it like in 10 minutes. Like, I just need to check it out. Couldn't get it. Too clumsy. Right. This stuff is all big stuff. You have to go to a training course to operate it and deploy it and maintain it. This was 2004, so it was a minute ago. Yeah. It just wasn't feasible. But I remember wanting to have that capability for our team for daily use. And it could have been, extremely helpful providing situational awareness on a million things. Is that dude on the street corner doing surveillance on me? Hey, is there an ambush down this road? You could have used it 1,000 different ways. But it was so, big and clumsy and restricted.
I followed the Canadian Army's experiences in Afghanistan as close as I possibly could. I served many years ago in the Canadian military, and there
Thank
was an
you for
example.
Your service.
So
thank you.
Same to you, man.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, same to you. But there was an example where the Taliban had really concentrated, and a Canadian company was under considerable pressure. And there was one of the big Reaper drones, I forget the names of the great big huge things that they got access to. But the feed was only being used back at brigade headquarters, and they wouldn't allow the company commander his own access to the picture, even though they could have. He had a ruggedized tablet that could easily have picked up the picture, but that was the TTP at the time. That was the doctrine, and it just seems so primitive now. And he was screaming literally into the radio for help and for artillery help, and he got nothing. And it was a bad day.
Yeah, that's one of the things that intelligence flow that the U.S. Army is going to have a really hard time with, because the Ukrainians have pretty much it's called Delta, I think, where they just look. You can look at whatever feed you want. It might be a Mavic drone, out in the field somewhere, or it might be a huge Bayraktar TB2, but you just kind of select what drone you want to look at. I was sitting in a battalion tactical operations center in Sumy, and they had 20 different screens, all split into tiny little screens, and then they would just pick a thumbnail and you could see whatever that drone was looking at the time. And these were really small, from really small all the way up to the ISR drones, but they could see. I remember watching Mavic drones take off and go to the objective. They were assaulting a Russian strong point, and I remember watching these Mavic drones. You could just see the feed going right to the Russians, flying over the Ukrainians. Unfortunately, the Ukrainians jammed their own. They had Rebs on top of their Bradleys, and they jammed the Mavics, and the Mavics just boop, went straight down.
Right. Fell to the ground.
Yeah. We tried for a little bit there. Remember, we had something, you might remember this. We had a GPS receiver handheld called a plugger, and then we went to a dagger, which was still a lumpy, giant, relatively speaking, giant piece of crap. But the plugger was definitely a piece of crap. And so guys were buying Garmin's GPS receivers. That was the big thing. Everybody was buying Garmin's because the technology was way more advanced than the military industrial crap that the U.S. Army had, and it was way more effective. Everybody could easily learn how to use it. It had more functionality, and then the U.S. Army said no. You for no good reason. They said just because it's not standard issue, you can't have that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
And the same way with the drones. We talk about the drone, the capability of the Mavic and the FPV is the cost. I can have 100 of these things in a small Connex, a small box, basically, I can take with me. And it doesn't cost me anything. And I can lose 10 of them, and I don't care. But at $50,000 a piece or $40,000 a piece for the American-made Mavic, because we can't buy anything Chinese, now you're talking about a controlled item. There's so much bureaucracy and BS that will go along with the $40,000 Mavic when you can buy it on Amazon for $900. Same thing.
And Terrible. you won't have 100 then, you'll have 4 at your allocation. And when they're gone, good luck. It'll a month before you get replacements, but both sides in Ukraine, units are constantly just buying their own. The Russians are always asking for money on Telegram, and invariably at the head of the list of whatever they're wanting for their unit, whether it's a drone detector or camouflage suits, number one is always Mavic 3. Mm-hmm. And there's just an insatiable hunger for the tremendous increase in situational awareness that these things offer for, as you say, a trivial cost when it comes to warfare. But would the U.S. Army allow its soldiers to buy their own if they use up their allocation? Just like you said, no, you can't buy a Garmin. Of course, you can't buy Mavics off of Amazon. There's Chinese components in it, so you can't. And that's that.
Yeah. And it's really a dual-edged sword, because you can get the latest cutting-edge Mavic 3 Pro for, I think that thing goes for like $3,000 or something like that. And you can get it shipped right to your door, and it will have way more functionality than whatever military drone that we come up with. At the same time, you can't develop large programs like the computer vision drone that Ukraine has been pumping a lot of money into it, like you mentioned. A battalion can't do R&D on that, right? No. You need some kind of centralized government to carry the torch on some kind of revolutionary technology like computer vision, even if it's last mile. I don't know what they call it, last mile computer vision, not full autonomy,
Yeah, that's what they're aiming at, last kilometer, pretty much. Last year, it was only the last 200 meters, and it just wasn't enough. That was one of the problems that they had with it.
So the EW was too strong? They would get into...
They were running into EW on that route. There's so many Rebs now that they would typically find that they wouldn't have... they're still having to deal with jamming before they get that close to the vehicle. They need to be able to locate vehicles or whatever they're trying to hit, whether it's a dugout, farther away. And so they're hoping for at least a kilometer. And the farther the better. But that just makes it's more of a challenge for an autonomous system to keep going that way, or at least a cost-effective one anyway.
Yeah, and it's going to be more expensive, right? So what do you think the average cost now that they're making 4,000 FPV drones a day? What do you think the average cost of an FPV drone is? I haven't looked into that in a year. Before the war started, it was like $350. You could get cheap Chinese components, make an FPV drone for $300-$400. And then the war kicked off, and then supply and demand. The demand went up, and I think FPVs went up to like $900, maybe $1,000 at the peak when there was a shortage and they were just starting to use them. But now they're making 4,000 a day. Like, how much do you think those things are worth each? Like $50? I don't know.
Well, I think more than that. Your standard radio FPV, which is still the great bulk, is certainly well under $1,000. I'll hear $400 or $700, somewhere around there. I don't think it's down to. I don't know. Those are just some numbers that pop up. It's I would be speculating, basically.
Yeah. And now they like to use, there's a lot more with infrared, a lot more infrared drones,
Yes.
FPVs. So they're probably...
Now there's an example where the cost has really plummeted when they first started to do nighttime drones. Whenever it was about a year ago, they were having to buy whatever was available on the marketplace, and thermal cameras, and were pretty costly. But like a few $1,000. So those drones were precious and scarce. But apparently with time, you can place large orders with China and get effective cameras as cheap as $200 per unit now, or less. So that's one of the reasons why those drones now, it's truly 24/7 saturation coverage, basically, of anything moving on the surface.
Yeah, I remember. It's hard to imagine that talking about 2022 and 2023 is like old history now. It's like a different war, because I remember in 23, like in summer 23, even some of the SSO guys that I was with, they didn't have night vision. Like it was, I would tell everybody when I come back from those trips that year, I'd be like, one of the things they need the most is night observation devices. They need thermal. They need, and now it's everywhere. Even the cheap, the destructible kamikaze FPV drones have it on them now. So,
yeah, and the Russians are working hard with trying to camouflage themselves at night with blankets, that hide your heat signature. And they did make a successful assault the other day. The whole unit crept along slowly with these blankets on them, and that's one of their nighttime tactics, is to creep along, hopefully completely covered by from observation from the air. And that hasn't worked for them sometimes, but occasionally, they have to, and so will Ukraine, and so will armies. All armies really have to understand, if they're facing a side that has bought into, massed like drones, that they're going to be everywhere, always within their range. So once you get within their range.
Have you seen the video? And I'm still not convinced this is not a fake video. Eric, remember the video of the Russian that snuck up on a Ukrainian in a trench? The Ukrainian it was nighttime. The Ukrainian had left the trench to go urinate, and the Russian had a thermal cloak on, and it snuck up on the Ukrainian, and then he throws off the cloak, and then he just stabs this dude to death. It's pretty macabre. Yeah. Remember that video, Eric? I can't forget it. Really?
That sounds bizarre. I mean, those thermal blankets, just like electric scooters, they work until they don't. Like, okay, the blanket isn't covering you perfectly. Oh, look, your leg is sticking out. Oh, well, that's why I dropped the first bomb. And I've seen a lot of videos of them, with the thermal cloaks, and I got it. That's what they got to do. Hard to completely cover yourself and move. It's like seeing some of those videos where the dude's like, the bush gets up and moves, and then the bush stops. And
exactly.
Like, I got it. You're doing what you can. But if I can pick that up, like, okay, I'm just going to start dropping bombs all around you.
And sometimes the thermal cloaks seem to be too cold, and they still stand out that they just don't fit in. It's it's an imperfect solution.
Yeah,
as you say, all they have.
Right. Yeah, they're using what they got. Yeah.
Yeah. You seem, on your account, the stuff that you publish, you seem very focused on the actual munition.
Yes.
That seems to be your focus. Anytime a new type of grenade or a new munition that are on, comes out, or there's some more information on how they develop it, you seem to be really laser focused on that.
Yeah, that's been my main interest. Utterly fascinated when how munitions are either fabricated with printers or they take existing Soviet design munitions and they have to refuse them because they're not going to work with the old fuse on a drone. And there's just an incredible variety of ways that each drone unit seems to have approached these things. There's just been some of them quite spectacular, mixing three things together, and some of them hard to figure out even. And I have to wait for further information on to finally get a handle on what they've done if the information on Telegram has been fragmented or it's just not enough. And so that's kind of got me into just to do that. I have to understand the Russian munitions, the sub-munitions and so forth that they tend to pull the old rockets apart and pull out the sub-munitions and repurpose them for drones. And it's quite a remarkable story. And that's really been, my prime interest. And the stuff comes out every day. It seems not every day, but most days. And
do you think you'd ever want to go and visit a Ukrainian drone bomb factory?
Here we go. Here comes the pitch.
I would love to. Yes, I'm involved with a group called Defense Tech for Ukraine, and it's a group of volunteers who try to come up with simple, cost-effective systems that can help Ukrainian drone units like anti-drone shotguns and net throwers and that sort of thing. And we're visiting Ukraine this summer. I still haven't committed fully yet because of various personal things, but they really want me to go, and I really want to go. Frankly, I think it'd be an incredible experience. And yes, that's exactly. I would love to go into a kitchen, as they call it, the Ukrainian kitchen, and see these things being produced. And
Tony, jump on them. Jump on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe we can get you into one. I've been to two. Yeah. Well, I've been to the same one twice on two different trips. North of Sumy, right near the Kursk border. It's a small house. It's probably a 500 square foot 2-bedroom house. And there's 3 guys or 4 guys, depending on how their workflow is set up. And one guy is taking apart munitions, and the other guy, scavenged whatever they got from the Russians. They're taking them apart. Some of them are sawing things, and it seems very sketch. The whole thing seems very sketch. And one guy was shoving plastique inside a 3D printed grenade. And the guy didn't. I tell this story all the time because the most remarkable thing about this is not that they're cutting Soviet era munitions in half, or that there's boxes and boxes stacked to the ceiling of hand grenades, like M57, U.S. Army hand grenades. And there's blocks of C4 just sitting there, right? Just stacked up. This place would destroy the entire village. No problem if the Russians knew where it was and hit it with anything, or if they were smoking around it, probably. But it was that guy shoving. Right. Yeah, it was the dude shoving plastique inside the munition without gloves on. No gloves. Yeah. He's just like, boop, boop. I'm like, that's gotta be toxic.
Dude, he's going to have a problem with air travel, bro. He's going to come up hot on airport security.
He can't get through.
The dogs are going to sniff him. Yeah.
For years, he'll never get rid of that smell.
It's in his
cute little beagles. The beagles are going to get him.
Yeah, they have a lot of confidence in military grade explosives are remarkably stable. They require special conditions to detonate, so they can saw them open and push them around, no problem. But as you say, there's other dangers that they're pretty casual about, and wear gloves, dude. Put on some, put on some hospital gloves.
I still love the video. Like it was like the first couple months of the war with all the anti-tank mines on the road, and the dude's just like, they're just sitting on the road, so they just kick them out of the way with their feet, and then like a car drives by. Like, I hope they're just dumb minds sitting on the road.
They understand how they work, and you know, they're made to take the weight of a vehicle to set them off, and they've become pretty confident. And they, even though they're old Soviet fuses, typically, they've, I guess, learned to be confident in anything that was produced military grade. They've not, you know, they're still there all these years later, and they still work. And so, I guess they have no, you know, they have to get on with things too, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, they are, you're right, they are stable. I think one of the conditions that would set them off, though, is a Russian glide bomb hitting that house and would destroy that whole village, because there's so much explosives there.
Rando explosive experience. I went to, I live in Arizona. There's thousands of old mine shafts like dotted across the state. Same with like Nevada. It's freaking everywhere. So we did a tour of this old school mine from like the late 1890s. And when you go down these shafts, it's nothing fancy. You're like, you're kidding me. People worked in this, like Tony's, you know, grandparent immigrants from Ireland or whatever were like working in there to make 50 cents a day. And, but they had these little nooks off to the side of the main line, like little holes where they would like save equipment or whatever, or store it, and then cover it up with rocks to discourage people from coming down and stealing or whatever. But this tour I went on, it was like 2 years ago. This guy's found like crates of dynamite, you know, in these little holes in the side of the mine. And I'm like, they're old or whatever. But he made the comment, he's like, they're sweating.
They're like, sweating nitroglycerin.
Yeah, exactly.
Nitroglycerin is still like, there.
Right? Like, don't even go near it, bro. Like,
don't touch them. Right?
From the 1890s,
Yeah, because that's all dynamite is. It's Nobel's insight to just stabilize nitroglycerin with, I don't think they use the same compounds now, but it's you know, you mix it up with like clay or something, and it stabilizes this, but it stacked, it'll all move down to the bottom and start to flow out.
Another guy I know who's a retired bomb tech from Tucson, but they said that he'll get, he got calls randomly like, I found a box of dynamite in Grandpa's barn or whatever. He said their policy is to not touch it or blow it in place. They're like, we're not picking it up. Like, we're not moving it and putting it into a warehouse. It's like, it's going to detonate. So I'm like, okay, so either you want your barn blown up or don't go near it in your barn.
Couldn't they send a robot in there to like grab it and then move it outside, and then they
too expensive.
Blow it in place? Yeah, I guess you're right.
The robot will blow up. They don't have the budget for that.
That's right. You got to protect the robots. That's where we're going.
Can't make it cheaply.
Robots first. Yep. Hey, Roy, this has been great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us your insights. There's probably a lot we could have asked you. We didn't even get to things like FPV drones coming off of sea babies and stuff like that.
This is just a first conversation with Roy.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to come back. Happy to come back. This has been quite fun. I was a little bit nervous.
That's the most shocking thing.
But you guys are
come back again.
You guys are you guys are easy to talk with, and I'd be happy to come back. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Happy to have you. All right.
No, that's great.
That's
great listening to you.
Well,
okay. Stay on the line after we quit here, and then we'll chat a little bit more. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Flash Traffic Podcast.